everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Laura Jones, and in this session I'm going to be speaking with Shane Benzie. Shane is a leading expert on human movement performance and has worked with numerous top marathon and ultra athletes, including Eliud Kipchoge, Kipsang, Nicky, Spinks and Tom Evans, just to mention a few. His journey started as an ultrarunner who became fascinated with the movement of the human body when running. This has led him on an incredible journey which includes research expeditions to communities such as the East African runners, Sherpas of the Himalayas, yogis of India, the Mongolian nomads and the Batek of Malaysia. When he's not travelling the globe with his running company Running Reborn, Shane lives in the UK. Thank you so much for joining us, Shane.
My pleasure.
And I'll just apologise to the audience for the fact that I'm in a Starbucks, but old Storm Chiara's played havoc with the internet. It's a bit of an impromptu decamp for me. Right, so first question, can you tell us how you got started in this area of work and what your work involves?
So I got involved because I was an ultra runner, and I, like most ultra runners, I came up against kind of two. One was that I was getting injured a lot. I was really beating up my body and hurting myself. And the other one was, I really wasn't getting any quicker. I was doing lots of training and working really hard and being very diligent, but just couldn't get any quicker. And so to solve both of those things, I kind of went on a journey really for myself just to find a better way to run. And that proved really difficult. It really did. I did the obvious thing of getting on the internet and sort of Googling and looking stuff, and went down various avenues, and spent time on treadmills with people to try and understand how I was moving, but really none of it made any sense. So, and yeah, later I'm still on that journey, and still learning, but hopefully I've learned some good stuff on the way.
And you've been all over the world researching and studying other runners in different parts of the world. Can you tell us just a little bit, because I imagine that there's so much you could tell us, but what are some of the most interesting things that you found?
Well, the reason I travel all around the world, not just to find blue sky, but my work is very much based on looking at what those you would call natural movement or natural human movement, because I work on the thought process that if you move like a human, that by default makes you a good athlete. So I take a pretty anthropological view of athletes and runners, in as much as, get them moving like a human, and I think they'll move well. In the Western world, we really don't move that well because a lot of our dynamic is our everyday movement. And so we don't live a very natural lives anymore. We sit a lot. We don't move well. So I have to travel further afield to look at what is natural movement. And yes, that takes me literally 6 continents to the Sahara, certainly all over Africa, India, Mongolia, as I think you mentioned, a lot of different places. Looking at athletes, often in extreme environments, but also baseline environments, but also studying indigenous people as well. Because I think indigenous people can do some incredible things with their body that we could learn from athletes. So all the time I'm looking to understand what beautiful natural movement is, put some science on that, then back to the runner.
So really, it's going back to the basics of how human beings kind of would have moved and used their body before all the kind of Western developments take place, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of I suppose there's been a lot of talk about persistence hunting, and we were hunter-gatherers, and so therefore and we're natural runners and walkers, and we'd kind of want to move like that again. So I'm going that route. But actually, what's really fascinating, you look at humans. Actually, we have a whole lot of idiosyncrasies in our movement that aren't necessarily ideal for efficient movement. And so, if somebody wants to run a sub-2 marathon and a 100-mile ultra, that's actually above and beyond what a hunter-gatherer would. The work is looking at natural human, identifying that, and then in many cases, ironing out the idiosyncrasies of natural human movement to create human performance.
Wow, it's really interesting. Okay, can you talk to us a little bit about your theories on facial elasticity in movements?
On which movement, sorry?
Sorry, it's not very good. Facial elasticity in movement.
Yeah, yes, that's the bit I get really excited about. I get really excited. And I think the reason I get really, well, there's two reasons I get really excited about it. One is we really know we have it completely. And the other thing I get excited about fascia is that if we move and we engage our fascial system, the elastic recoil and propulsion is actually free, because elastic energy doesn't want any oxygen from you or any calories. It doesn't produce lactate. It's kind of an energy source. And on my first trip to Africa, to here, when I very first started getting involved in this, I watched runners that were incredibly fluid and elastic and synergistic and connected in their movement. Amazing. And that kind of mystified me, because we just don't move like that in the Western world. And so I spent a lot of time here on my first trip trying to understand what that was. Couldn't really understand what it was. I could see it, but didn't understand it. And so I came scurrying back to the UK, good Wi-Fi, and started my work as a researcher to understand what like that. And pretty quickly identified the fascial system, the elastic system. A decade later, chasing that and trying to understand better what it is and utilize it.
Yeah, so that's really interesting that you kind of saw the way these athletes were moving, and it's trying to work out how to emulate it, I guess.
Yeah, and you know, one of the big things I think is, so our movement is largely based on perception of the movement. Okay, so what I mean by that is, as you're running, what you think is happening as you're running, as the movement. And you may say, well, I don't have a perception of my run. But we all do have a perception, even if it's a subliminal perception of our movement is based on, and I think climate almost throws us a curve ball on our perception of our movement. It doesn't inspire us to move in an elastic, fluid, or connected way. Move correctly with that series of levers that would never inspire us to get some of these beautiful positions. The African runners, for example, running. So a lot of my work with athletes who work on their perception of movement, that goes a long way to change movement. So actually, one of these, can you see model okay? I'm never about a meter away from these. So it's a child's toy, but actually it's a tensegrity model, okay? And the concept of integrity, or biotensegrity for us as humans, is that all the bones in our body are floating. No bone touches another bone in your body. And this is a really good example of that. So the wood is your bones, and the elastic stuff that the wood is sitting in. So actually, as you run, your bones are just free floating in a sea of tension created by your system. If you get beautifully tall, you create lots of recoil in your body. If you run with your head down, the waist are not elastic in your body at all, your muscles have to do everything. Suddenly start to see ourselves as a fluid floating in a sea of energy. Way we think about our movement, and so the way, and so if you believe that all you put in a body, you would make it differently, let alone run.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And how much of a difference does running with good technique make? You know, how important is it?
Well, I suppose as a movement coach, I would say it makes a huge difference. It's very, very, of course. But that's why I'm a movement coach. I think it's huge. I think we're running this amazingly strong engine. Actually, so much of that engine's work has to go on in efficient movement. So, we can load the joints correctly, if we can load the soft tissues correctly, if we can put the correct movements into our body, harness the impact that we create and turn it into elastic energy, we're a lot less likely to get injured. We need a lot less to carry out this process, which means we can go faster for longer. So it strengthens us on the move, and allows us to perform much, much better. So I think it's huge.
And what about foot contact? Can you tell us about this and what we should be doing, with our feet?
How long have we got for that one? Okay, so I think for the people that are watching, or start with your foot at the interface between you and the ground. Okay, so when your foot, it's kind of 5 really big tasks to sort out for you. If you land it correctly, it will create stability, it will create elasticity, it will dissipate the impact that's coming back at you. It also maximizes your foot, 250,000 nerve endings on the bottom. If you land your foot correctly and you utilize those nerve endings, that's the information for your body as you're moving through your environment. It tells you how hard you hit the ground, what the ground felt like, your spatial awareness and your perceived rate of inertia. So you gain a lot from that. And also where the foot lands in relationship to the body when it hits the ground will determine how much you need. Foot's incredibly important to doubt. And I think what we're actually looking for is what I would call a tripod landing. Okay, but tripod landing, if you imagine the 3 points of a tripod being underneath the heel, underneath the ball of the foot, and kind of underneath the bottom of the little toe, if you like. So a full foot landing or a tripod landing. And that comes from years of looking at elite athletes, but also indigenous people. And in fact, not just elite athletes, but people running all over the world. I work with world record holders, but I also work with complete beginners as well. Tripod landing is what we're after. I think that makes a huge, huge difference.
I bet you've been really interested by all this latest Nike shoe talk and.
I was in Vienna for when Kipchoge did his he did an amazing. Been a lot of talk since, and I think it's a big game actually because I think we live in a society where we quite like the idea of buying our way out of trouble, and if we part a couple of £100, it will make us bounce fast or easy. I think we should work hard to learn how to land the foot. The foot is a genius thing. It's the cleverest thing in the animal kingdom. Amazing. To try and second guess these I just think works. So I don't really get involved in that. If there is any advantage in it, I think only work on the foot of an incredibly talented, passionate athlete. So I think work hard, move well, and you don't very much about.
Okay, so obviously we mentioned before you've travelled all over the world studying runners from various different continents. If you could pick out some common traits that you see amongst the top runners, what would they be?
Well, I think the big one, and actually it's the one I also see in indigenous people as well, is relaxation in their movement. I think we treat running, and I know I used to treat running a blood and guts, where if it's not hurting, not working, no pain, no gain. You only get out of it what you put into it. And so we think of running as something where you just put a pair of trainers on hard. I think for beautiful movement, whether it's indigenous people or whether it's athletes, whether they are running a sub-2 marathon, whether they're running a 100-mile ultra, doing the UTMB, or actually doing the more relaxation you can create in your body, the better it performs. Tension in the body, muscular tension in the body is like putting on the brake, and it uses a huge amount of energy. So I think I see running a sequence of beautiful moves you make that propel the body, a bit like ballet, martial art, sequence of beautiful moves. Now, it doesn't always feel like that, and I'm not sat here in some ivory tower That's how it is. 'Cause I was, I was worst of all. But if you can learn to rely on the fact that you put your body in these beautiful positions, it starts to propel your body. Running faster, running better, it's kind of taking off the brake. Rather than running more miles or going to the gym and getting stronger to take on this really tough act of running, it's actually taking off the brakes and the belief and the relaxation to be able to do that. So relaxation in the body is by far the biggest. And certainly here in Africa, when I'm working with runners and watching runners, that you see a huge amount of that, huge amount.
And does that sort of, I can imagine that would help reduce injury risk as well, running in that more relaxed state.
Yeah, well, I think from an injury point of view, most injuries come from soft tissue injuries, come from using or overusing those soft tissue and how to food them. Often we ask muscle body to do the wrong task because we're moving well. By getting that foot interface, you've got 2.5 times your body coming back at you when your foot hits the ground. So Newton's third law, any action is met by an equal and an opposite. So when a human runs and the foot hits the ground, you've got 2.5 times your body weight coming back at you. So we immediately start to dissipate that impact so that it doesn't. And then if we can load the joints correctly and use the right muscles for the right part, rather than injuring us, we can actually strengthen our body, move. Because I believe if you run around let's say a running track, if you run a running track beautifully, you are conditioning your body to make movement, which builds absolute specific strength. And so again, the great runners here in Africa, they create their strength and conditioning on the trails by moving well. So I think that if we move beautifully, we can actually start to strengthen the body for that task. And it may can only move really, really well for a few 100 meters, maybe then 100 meters, 2 kilometers. It's almost like couch to 5K for your gait sometimes. We all get the couch to 5K thing, and it's amazing for getting people running their engine, but actually couch to 5K can also work for people's gait. So, you'll have people listening and think, wow, that's all great, but I've got to run 100 miles. How do I run 100 miles beautifully? I think getting that movement, start understanding what that beautiful is, and then build it up distance-wise.
Yeah, that's going to be my next question actually. When you're coaching someone and helping them to change their running style, do you find there's a period of sort of pain before gain? How does it normally sort of work out?
Yeah, definitely, real challenge. Changing your gait is a real challenge, but actually, if we understand the challenge, I think the more likely we are to over. I think one of the big misconceptions what I've learned is, if you and I work together today on your movement, on your gait, and we got you moving in a different way, it's not actually your muscles we're teaching a new memory. Muscles don't really have a memory. They don't really know what they did yesterday. They're not that smart. It's a software thing. If we change your thought process, if we change your perception of your movement, they then give different commands, or that then gives different commands to your many muscles. So running gait change is largely a software thing. Right? Really exciting, because actually we think, oh well, I've got to teach my body this new trick, and I haven't got the muscle memory. I didn't do it when I was young, or I haven't done it for a long. Actually, it's really not the way. This is what we coach. So it's still a challenge, of course, and it takes different runners different amounts of time to make changes depending on what position you've come from, you want to get to. But straight away, I mean, I work with 2 people on 2-hour workshops, and straight away within that 2 hours, they're moving differently because we and change that software for good. So I think once we know that, it's a much easier task. And actually, when I talk about the elastic system, the fascial system in the body, this elastic stuff, the really exciting thing for runners, or for anybody, any human actually, is that this elastic system that kind of gives your body its sea of tension, creates the elastic recoil in the body, gives you of elastic propulsion. Do you know, it's never more than 7 months. Its life re-architecting period, rejuvenating period is 7 months. So if I bumped into you at the end of the system that is holding you up in Starbucks now will have completely gone and changed and be re-architected. If you don't change your movement patterns, it will be a new system but doing the same job. But if you change your movement, you become a better mover, more elastic, put more tension into the elastic. You have a whole new elastic system that is fit for purpose. Why? I think of training more Darwin fitness than cardiovascular fitness. So I think if you move beautifully, on the move, you're actually re-architecting a body better for that task tomorrow. So for your listeners, when a runner runs tomorrow, if they're going to be working on their engine, better engine or maintaining the got, that's good. But also if they move well, they're going to re-architect their body that's better for that task tomorrow. And if you really buy into that, it's a
and do you think that extends to just going about your everyday life, not just when you're, perhaps you might consciously think about it when you're running, but do you think there's something to be said for the way we move, just going about our day-to-day lives?
Kind of back to our first conversation we had about me having to travel around the world to find natural movement. Our everyday movement isn't conducive to good dynamic movement. And so a lot of us are sat in front of computers up for 9-10 hours a day sometimes. Yes, how the sea of tension that you put your body in during the working day, during your everyday life, affects the 1 or 2 hours a day, without a doubt. And so, the biggest change you could make, not everybody can do this, but a standing desk would be incredible. So if you were stood at a standing desk, let's on your tripod feet, with a lengthened spine, a neutral pelvis, eye line on your computer, working, breathing into the bottom third of your lungs, training for 9 hours, your dynamic movement is just an extension of that. Whereas we tend to slightly strange position for a lot of our day. So yes, moving more, putting height into our body wherever we can, and when we're standing, try and stand on even weight on our hips. We tend to go on to these days and have the poking out into a strange angle. All of that's creating slightly strange sea of tension. So yeah, running dynamic movement is only ever an extension of your everyday movement. And when I coach people, all of the dynamic movement coaching filters back into their everyday life so that they can start to pick up some ideas of how they can do that. But a standing desk is a big one that many of your viewers and listeners could potentially do tomorrow.
Okay, you've talked a lot about how you believe a lot of runners overtrain, run too many miles. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's just because of this mentality that more is better?
Yeah, I think we live in an age now where it's quite voyeuristic, so lots of people can see what you're doing. So people like to get some good mileage under their belt so that they can kind of be seen to do it. Well, I think that most people are running lots of miles with absolutely the best intentions. And I think because when we run, let's say we've got an ultra coming up in October, so we think, right, okay, I've got quite a few months to get ready for it. I'm going to really get training. I think most people's training is all based on their engine. Is right, let's get lots of miles in, let's build this really, really good engine, and that will help me to complete the ultra. And I think I mentioned it earlier, I wonder how many miles we're running to make up for movement. So if every mile we ran was a mile that concentrated on a good engine, but also concentrated on good form, we wouldn't need such a big engine. And I think in that work with many runners where you bring their actual 70% of what they were running, relying on a body that's fit for the task of running whilst you're running. And then that, of course, to recover and get fit. Fit happens when you relax. If we never really stop and relax, we never really create the fitness we're after. But I work with loads of other coaches, amazing coaches out there that are coaching sort of mileage plans. and there are a lot of great, and they're kind of working on this less is more junk. So if you're an ultra runner out, there are some great coaches out, training plans and the philosophy behind them, and try and look at, try every mile needs to be good mile. You need to get something out of that mile. And from my point of view, I say, try and move well in that mile. You'll re-architect the body better for the calves tomorrow. So therefore you don't have so much oxygen, but you're building up a really big engine to try and create.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And what about this belief that its impact largely causes injury? Does that mean that, ultra runners really should be using more of a shuffle running technique as opposed to, what's your thoughts?
No. One of the big, every now and again when I'm doing my work and I'm researching, I have one of those amazing moments. Wow, okay, I get it. And, one of the biggest findings over this decade of work in the impact for a runner is thing. It's great. My curtain's blowing across. Impact actually turns into elastic energy, which propels you. So we need impact. And does impact into runners? Yes, if you don't manage it well. If you don't harness you up. But if you move well, it throws you into great elastic. You've 2.5 times your body weight coming back at you. Run, that turns into elastic energy, and that throws forward. So if you do the ultra shuffle, you're really big things that propels you. You minimize the impact that much anyway. I have some very clever sensors that I put on runners, and it will tell me in newtons of impact how much impact you create as you move. And it's about 2.5 times your body weight. And I did some really interesting work with an ultra runner, Pavel Polonci. Some of you will have heard. Many will have heard of Pavel Polonci. Great athlete. He's won the Spine 3 times. He's an amazing adventure racer. And I did some work with for research. And Pavel's about 6'4", and he's about 95. He's the big strong guy. So if anybody's going to, it would be Pavel. And so I did some research on Pavel and got him running around and looked at the creating and looked at how we could change and make him more efficient. One of the ways we wanted to make him more efficient was to create a little bit more oscillation in run, a little bit more air in his stride. So we actually took his vertical oscillation up from about 7.5 centimeters to about 9 centimeters, which doesn't sound a lot, but that's quite a bit of air to create. That allowed him to egg circling underneath him and allowed him to land his foot well. It allowed him to put elasticity into his body. So he'd upped his vertical oscillation by quite a lot, but it only put 2% on the amount of impact he was creating when he hit the ground. So he changed he'd got more air, he'd got more dynamic, but actually his impact had only gone up by 2%. So very, very low, very, very low. So the people that are out there trying to put down to the ground, reduce impact, A, probably aren't, and B, are reducing themselves to running with a walking gait, which means they're probably landing on a heel on a straight leg, which means they're not dissipating the impact correctly. And actually the thing that coming back to get is, yeah, but I can imagine lots of ultra runners listening or watching and saying, oh yeah, that's fine. Track with lots of air. Try running 100 miles with lots of, that's hard. And it is, it's hard. I know. A whole new wave of ultra runners coming now, being more in that way. So people like Tom Evans, I work with Tom Evans, he's very, very good at it. Damien is very, very, Nicky, who you mentioned, she's very, very good at it. Ben Parks, runner, but actually now taking on ultras, also very good. Dan Lawson, who I've done some work with, amazing. Dan do this almost in run with this running gait. So even if we're not one of those runners, it doesn't mean to say that we can't start to adopt this thought process. And many of us, if we're going to do 100 miles, human, normal humans, not like those other athletes we were talking about, you will have a run-walk strategy. But when you're running, we should beautifully. When we're walking, we should walk, but not have this grey area in between, which is an energetic walk that I suppose we call shuffling or jogging. That's what injures us. So beautiful walking, and honestly, you'd be amazed with practice and some thought behind it, what you achieve in that way. Because the elastic system we largely want to help us with that, more than 7 months old. So we can, we can recreate ourselves pretty quickly.
That's really interesting. Okay, so what about when you're running on trails and there's technical downhills and that sort of thing? How what should we be doing or not be doing when we're on that sort of terrain?
So downhilling, I think downhilling is a big one, and it's one that a lot of people would say is their weakness, and probably dangerous. You're going to fall down. It's probably downhill, not uphill. So there's quite a lot at stake. And if you're running along the flats, it's about 2.5 times your body weight coming back at you. If you're running downhill, as much as 4. So it can really start to get big. I think one of the big things we do when we're running down here, and I certainly used to do it myself, we almost think, right, we're running downhill, we can just disengage the brain, gravity's going to let the body go. But that almost always means that we overstride. And then the amygdala in our brain cuts in, thinks we're going to have a really bad accident, and it may have a point, and it actually then gets us to brake. And we invest a straight leg out in front of us on a heel to slow ourselves down, to please the amygdala in our brain. We think 4 times our body weight coming up a very straight leg, and our quads definitely pay for the body in time to come, without a doubt. So I think when you're running downhill, very, very quick, small steps, because where possible, we still want that tripod landing, because running down a hill, we want that stability, elasticity, feedback from the nerve endings, and dissipation of impact more than ever, more than when we're on the flat. So when we're running downhill, very, very tiny strides, very, very quick strides, giving us lots of proprioception, keeping that foot more underneath us. You're actually a lot more in control then as well. You get very, very big strides and are turning their legs over underneath them and getting lots of air. But that's a tricky task, and certainly one that needs a lot of work. Nicky Spinks, who you mentioned, she's amazing at it, absolutely amazing at it. And I've worked with Nicky Kipchoge out in Sherpas. She's at it as well. But I think for most people, soften the knees, very, very quick steps underneath you, and keep your head up and kind of really look where you're going. That gives you, again, it's very much a software.
Yeah, most of us that have got life preservation. What about uphills? Quite often there's a decision that you have to make about whether to try and run or whether to hike. From a movement perspective, what should we be doing about the uphills?
So I think running, the big decision you make at the bottom of a hill is, should you run it or should you walk it? Well, I think that's got a lot to do with your ability. But whether you run it or you walk it, I think one of the big things, the big traps we fall into, is that as soon as we hit a hill, we seem to have this magnetic thing in our chest which kind of just sucks us down to the hill, and we bend from the waist, and we don't want to do that. The moment you bend from the waist, your quads and your lower back are now working really hard to be in a slightly furious position. And then, of course, we've lost any elasticity in the body. Our head position comes down, the head gets very heavy. So when we're moving up the hill, the big advice I can give is to stay tall. Stay tall doing everything. But it really, up a hill, it's incredibly important. There's no point in getting really high knees if your foot is just going to drop back underneath you again. So again, lots of very small steps, but with lots of height. That's probably the easy advice I can give to someone who's going to run a hill tomorrow.
You talk about the power of the group. Can you tell us what you've learned about this during your travels?
The biggest, apart from factor, it might be the biggest thing actually. Yeah, the here is where I found it. So working here with the athletes, they live in very tight knit You know, they live, eat and drink and sleep together in very, very tight-knit groups. And I think that's incredibly powerful, because when I watch them, they push each other to their absolute maximum when they're training and when they're racing. But they're there to put their arm around each other when it's not going well. I think it's massive. I think it's absolutely huge. And it's fascinating when you watch Europeans and Americans come out to Africa to train. They'll train on their own paper, on concrete, completely ignoring, which is possibly the biggest thing that actually they can learn from. It's amazing. Tomorrow I'll be on the track and I'm watching runners. And if you can visualize, I think we've probably all seen it, is imagine the Africans running around the track together in maybe 6 or 7. They'll run together in this beautiful kind of uniformed way. Often you'll see at the back of that group a couple of athletes that don't move quite so well because they're new to the group. And what will happen is they will drop into the number 3 and number 5. And then kind of by osmosis, because they're surrounded by beautiful movement, it changes movement. It's like this conveyor belt of beautiful movement, and they will move up that conveyor belt as they get better, and then new runners will drop in. So yeah, I think the great running groups in the UK which do inspire you to get out on a Tuesday night when it's raining and things aren't so good. So I really think it's amazing. And I think certainly with the Africans, there's thoughts of running out of poverty, there's running at altitude, there's running, there's diet. All of those things are huge, but I see the power of the group as the big one. And of course you see it in indigenous people as well. In Malaysia, you know, who are very, very tight community, very, very tight group, hugely tolerant of each other, and just means they just interact very, very well as a group. And I think we could learn that as athletes, and probably learn quite a lot of that from our everyday lives, about tolerance and being relaxed, which actually feeds back into our running, as our everyday life does. So I think it's a huge one. I've just written a book called The Lost Art of Running, but I just started the second one talking because I think it's huge.
Yeah, I would really agree without a doubt. And what's that saying? If you want to go far, go together, or something.
It's. I think we kind of know it, and I think the great thing about the ultra community is you really get that. You know, people really help each other, and I don't think I've ever run a long ultra race spending time with these 5 or 6 people during that race, because I was never that. So it always took me a long time. And I used to still keep in touch with those people, and I think that's great. So yeah, the group is massive, and there are lots of forums now and stuff like that, and lots of Facebook groups and stuff, and things like what you're doing. I think that's really good to kind of join those and swap information. And even if you can't go running with somebody every day, you can at least feel part of that group. I think it's huge.
I would agree. Okay, so last question as we come to a close. What would you say are some key actions that members of the audience could take, almost straight away, which might help to improve their running technique?
The biggest thing, let me choose wisely. Okay, so I think the biggest thing you could do tomorrow, kind of the power of the group thing as well, is buddy up with someone or a few people, run around. Oh, sorry. I'll be there for a second. I'm just gonna plug in. I'm losing juice. Technology. The biggest thing you could do, buddy up with someone or a couple of runners or a few runners and video each other. Seeing your move is amazing, absolutely amazing. Because sometimes we have this thought process that we're running like something out of Chariots of Fire and it's all beautiful. And actually when we see ourselves, it's not quite as good as we thought. So I know that's how it is for me. But shop window and shadows apart, it's not always easy to know. So buddy up with a few people. The technology we have these days is so easy, isn't it, to video the running. Have a bit of fun with it. Look at how that foot's standing. Look at what you're doing with your arm. Look at what your posture's like. And then you're amazed and celebrate or panic, depending on what you see. And then you can start doing some research on that and start understanding maybe what's a better thing to do. And then if you're out running with those people, they can critique you and you can help each other while you're. So see yourself and read and until you're blue in the face on tape. It's a movement thing. You've got to do it. You've got to see yourself do it before you can even begin down what you're doing. So get tomorrow if that storm's still too bad over there, and run around and film each other.
Good advice and perfectly practical. Everybody could do that tomorrow. Okay, that brings us to the end. Thank you ever so much for joining us today, Shane, from sunny Kenya. Really appreciate it. And what we'll do is we'll add all the links so that people can check you out online and read a little bit more about you and what you do. Thank you everybody for watching, and thank you very much indeed, Shane.